We need to talk about the Sacramento Kings because I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what the hell they doing out in Sacktown. Just 2 short years ago, Sacramento re-entered the stage of relevancy as they were able to reach 48 wins, #1 ranked offense, and gave us a team that many people, especially Kings fans, will never forget. The Light the Beam season will certainly go down in Kings history that won't be forgotten, not only because of the success that they reached, but a style of play that was very intoxicating and enjoyable to watch. They poured on endless amount of threes, had a lot of upside, and right in the focal point of it all was a young guard in De'Aaron Fox and a big man in Domantas Sabonis that the Kings really wanted to cash out on after trading Tyrese Halliburton. A first-round exit was inevitable in my humble opinion, their ceiling, but hey, when you're an organization that hasn't made the playoffs since 2006, you're going to take anything that you can get. The following season, Sacramento was knocked out in the first round with a 46-win season. Many people would chalk it up to regression from some of the younger players as well as injuries, which I do believe was fair. However, ignoring how hyper-competitive the Western Conference was and will continue to be is something that is very ignorant, but unfortunately many people decided to do, which then led us to last season where obviously everything eventually fell apart. Before the season even began, there were endless questions about what exactly Sacramento was going to look like in the future, especially in a Western Conference where you need to improve on a year-to-year basis. That improvement came in the form of trading Harrison Barnes to the San Antonio Spurs for DeMar DeRozan, an extremely questionable fit and an even more questionable decision when you had to pair a draft pick with Harrison Barnes in the process to get DeMar DeRozan. Didn't make any sense whatsoever. This stalled out an offense that had hyper-efficient moments in the 2 years prior and never really addressed any of the defensive concerns whatsoever. Compound this with Keegan Murray plateauing, Davion Mitchell basically walking for nothing, and Keon Ellis receiving little to no minutes, a team that just 2 years ago won 48 games, the next year 46, was in the middle of the season where they were barely going to break 500. This forced their star guard De'Aaron Fox to really question what exactly the front office was doing, which inevitably led to a trade demand. Now, anyone in their right mind would know if you were in a situation where you don't really have that much of a future, a team that was already going backwards in terms of games in the win-loss column, and more importantly, a roster that was running out of viable options in terms of younger players, when you are trading your star athlete, would you A, trade for draft capital, B, trade for young players, or C, go out there and get another veteran that's older and isn't really going to help you win games? A normal team would probably go for option A or B, but the Sacramento Kings decided to go with the latter. They traded De'Aaron Fox to the Sacramento Spurs, did receive some draft compensation, but their biggest return was Zach LaVine. Now, I'm a fan of LaVine as well as many other people. However, at the age and contract that he is receiving, it just didn't make any sense, especially because this is a roster that already had a very defined ceiling, and that's once more was at its best a first-round exit. A full rebuild is what would have made sense, but no, not for Sacramento. They finished the season with a record of 40-42, the 7th ranked offense, and at the bottom 10 on the defensive side of the floor, which then leads us to this offseason where, in my opinion, it would make the most sense to field out as many options as possible, try to get as much as you can in return for all of the veteran pieces on this team, but instead, once more, the Kings decided to double down with possibly the most confusing roster I have ever seen in my life. They brought in Dennis Schroeder, extended Keegan Murray a year before they really needed to, which is not only questionable, but also the amount of money that they gave him certainly is a head scratcher, especially when you compare him to some of his contemporaries, in particular Jabari Smith, where I believe that both of these players are roughly in the same ballpark. If anything, Jabari might be slightly better because of his upside defensively, and yet Houston was able to sign him to a rookie contract extension that was roughly $20 million less. And then their final move in the offseason that they decided to make was bringing in Russell Westbrook. Yes, it's exciting to see Westbrook in the NBA, even if it's on a non-guaranteed contract, so who knows how long his ability to be an NBA player will last, but it does still beg the question, what exactly is Sacramento doing? Because this roster makes absolutely positively no sense whatsoever. For starters, this is a roster that more than likely is going to have to play small ball for large portions of the season as they start the year off with not only Keegan Murray sideline, but also Domantas Sabonis. And even if you look at their depth chart, Sabonis is literally the only player on this roster that is above 6'9" that is going to receive consistent minutes, unless you're telling me that you're going to see a lot of PT from Dario Saric. I hope not, because that's certainly questionable. Beyond that, the guard depth really isn't that great either. Sure, Dennis Schroeder and Russell Westbrook are solid veterans who can contribute to winning basketball. However, on this roster, it doesn't really make much sense, especially with the lack of three-point shooting. Furthermore, speaking of three-point shooting, it's practically erased. Zach LaVine, Doug McDermott, and Keegan are really the only three players on this team that you could hope to see 38, if not higher percent from behind the arc. Everyone else not only doesn't really provide much of any floor spacing, but you could very well argue are negative floor spacers, especially when the ball is out of their hand. The redundancy in shot selection will clearly be seen as a bunch of players that will exist in the mid-range area, in particular in that floater range with Schroeder, DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis, and Russell Westbrook. So I don't know how any of that's going to work. And then on the defensive side of the floor, it's just a massive yikes. Hopefully Keon Ellis receives more minutes this year than he did last year, because I am personally a huge fan of what he can provide to a team. But outside of Ellis and maybe the versatility of Keegan Murray, there's really nothing that's that optimistic defensively on this roster whatsoever. You could very well argue that I would be generous by claiming that majority of the players on this team are neutral or slightly below average as defenders. And yes, I think that would be very generous for some of these players on this team. Now look, I personally like a lot of the players on this roster from an individual standpoint. And you could certainly argue when things go awry, which I do believe they're going to. There's already rumors claiming that Domantas Sabonis over the offseason went to the front office seeking some form of clarity on what exactly this team is going to do, which sounds very similar to the same path that we saw from Fox just a calendar year ago. So there's that. But from an individual standpoint, a lot of these players are really solid. Zach LaVine, even at the price point, is still a really good player, elite level three-point shooter. I believe way more dynamic than a lot of people give him credit for. And I do believe in a right system, he could really contribute. Domantas Sabonis, I think, speaks for himself. All-star to fringe all-NBA caliber big man, really good passer for his position. And I do believe with the rebounding in his favor, defensively, he's not completely bad as people make him out to be. DeMar DeRozan, even at an advanced age, is a consistent bucket getter, especially in late game situations. And Dennis Schroeder has steadily been a quality contributing point guard in the NBA outside of that very wonky subsection of games when he played for the Warriors last year. But outside of that, I'm actually a huge fan of what Dennis Schroeder could provide to a team. And this kind of can go on and on for several players on this roster. But when they are put together, it's just a massive no. It's a big old yikes, dog. Big old yikes. What makes this roster construction even more frustrating is that you kind of knew that this is the path that you were going down anyway. After trading De'Aaron Fox, it should have been known that this team needed to blow it up. They needed to restart, have some of their younger players retain as much youthfulness and draft picks as possible, and decide to just start all the way over. I know for a fact you want to sit here and live out the glory days of something that happened 2 years ago that you could not sustain, but at the end of the day, you're at a dead end. This is a roster that screams 38 to 42 wins, that's going to be below average on both sides of the ball. 4 of their top 6 rotational players are all over the age of 30. And even when you look at younger players like Murray, Carter, Ellis, and Clifford, they're not going to really receive any consistent minutes outside of Murray. Starting the season with 2 of your bigger players already sidelined, I just don't know what this team is waiting on. It's inevitable that they're going to have to hit the restart button. And instead of doing so when you had a little bit more leverage and had a more valuable trade asset in De'Aaron Fox, you're now going to have to try to find a home for Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis, and maybe a few other players, some of which there really already wasn't that much of a market out for these players, especially Zach LaVine. As much as I may like him, the Chicago Bulls were actively trying to find anyone to take him off their hands. There were actually reports claiming, because how much money he made, that they were willing to even pair him with a draft pick to get them off the roster. So for whatever reason, if you're Sacramento, you think you can get a better return for Zach LaVine, I would love to see it, but I highly doubt it's going to happen. Sacramento is just stubborn. It's very obvious what this team is going to result into, but for whatever reason, it hasn't hit them yet. But this year, it certainly will, because they really have no other choice but to accept reality. Zach LaVine, after this season, is on a player option, so he could potentially walk in free agency for literally nothing. DeMar DeRozan, after this season, has a non-guaranteed year left on his contract, so he too could literally walk for nothing. Malik Monk, after the season, does have one more fully guaranteed year left on his deal, but they are already rumored to trading him to try to free up some cap space to add someone like Russell Westbrook, which is a big old yikes, and I assume that they're probably going to trade him anyway. Who knows what they're going to receive in return for what he can provide, which again is pretty good, but at the price point, I don't really think there's going to be that many suitors. And then the biggest fish of them all is Domantas Sabonis. After this year, he does have 2 more years left on his contract. However, it seems as if like he's only a few months away from demanding a trade himself, especially if the season starts off really, really slow. Add in the fact that this is going to be one of the most competitive Western Conference that we've seen in a very, very long time. And I do believe it's going to be extremely clear very early on how far removed Sacramento is from competing, despite the fact that they're trying to build a win now team. So, yeah, I'm confused. I don't know what exactly Sacramento's doing. They don't have that much flexibility. They're like literally right on the line of the luxury tax. A bunch of players who are old, not going to be a part of their future. And even the players that will be a part of their future, they haven't really lived up to expectations. Hopefully Keegan comes out from his injury and has a really good season. Hopefully Keon Ellis plays more minutes as well. Hopefully Nick Clifford gives a lot more potential early on so Kings can finally wake up to what exactly they have on their roster and the decision that they need to make. Until then, I just don't know what to say outside of this is one of the most confusing rosters I have ever seen in my life.